All in all, the Zionist settler state has put Donald Trump in a whole lot of trouble. There can be little doubt that the two reasons why the Epstein files have now been suppressed, at least until somebody leaks them, is that Donald Trump himself is personally implicated in the Epstein affair, which should come scarcely as a surprise given the long decade of close relationship between the two men, and given the cut of both of their jibs, given the predilections written all over the faces of both men and in 10,000 photographs. It will come as no surprise to anyone that in his New York days, Donald Trump was a hedonistic, sybaritic, fornicating individual who was of low morals. Let me leave it at that. That will come as no surprise. The fact that he was filmed whilst doing so must have come as a surprise to him. I say that because if Donald Trump had known that he was so heavily implicated in the Epstein papers that they could not possibly be released, he would not have spent the last few years threatening condign punishment on every paedophilic rapist that was found to be a part of the Epstein affair. He would not have campaigned in the presidential election, saying that he was going to open the books, saying that he was going to unmask everybody involved in this shocking, horrific scandal. His Attorney General would not have claimed that she had the file on her desk. His Attorney General would not have said that there are hundreds of thousands of hours of videotape, which has deeply shocked even the hard-bitten Department of Justice. If Donald Trump had known that he featured so heavily in the Epstein affair that it could not be released, his director of the FBI and deputy, for now, director of the FBI, would not have been swashbuckling around on every podcast, every television screen that they could find, warning that justice was coming for Epstein's victims, warning that every criminal would be named and shamed, unmasked, and forced to take the perp walk. If Donald Trump had known that he could not release the Epstein files, he would not have been saying that he was going to, right up until the very last minute. The White House would not have handed out these binders, which now we're supposed to believe were actually empty binders, even though they said on the front, Epstein Affair Part 1. Donald Trump clearly intended to go through with all the promises that he had made about justice for the victims of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. The fact that he was in the end unable to do so reveals the second of these major scandals. It is undeniably true. It is more than highly likely, it is undeniably true that Epstein was an agent of the Israeli intelligence service. Epstein and his paramour, Ghislaine Maxwell, daughter of Robert Maxwell, a decades-long serving officer of the Israeli intelligence service, Mossad. Epstein met Ghislaine Maxwell whilst he worked in the office of Robert Maxwell in London. Epstein went from being a maths teacher in a state school with no college degree to be a man richer than Croesus. Epstein rose from being a school teacher in a state school to owning multiple airplanes, yachts, the biggest house in Manhattan, villas in Arizona, ranches in Arizona, villas in Florida, and an entire island in the Caribbean. Not bad going. But when you look at the people that he had around him, when you look at the people who gave him money, gave him hundreds of millions of dollars, all of them are deeply implicated in the sins and crimes of the settler state of Israel. I could run through all the names, but my guest this evening will know more about them. The one thing I know about them is that Wexner et al. Were all deeply implicated in the Israel lobby's stranglehold over American politics. I've been saying to you for a very long time that Israel performed state capture in the United States, as it has performed state capture in Britain and presumably other European countries too. And that state capture is based upon both cash and compromat. And each is as important as the other, and even the giving of the cash becomes compromat. But the deadliness of the Epstein affair is that it entrapped people on the way up in business, in politics, in media, in not just sins, but crimes. Crimes against little girls. Crimes against children. The kind of crimes that no one would ever forget or ever forgive. The kind of crimes that would ruin not just your career, but your marriage, your family life, your friends. Nobody would ever again want to know you. And so I'm left to speculate that Donald Trump learned at the very last minute that he was so compromised by this compromise. We know about the cash, $100 million from Miriam Adelson, and that was only that which was declared. But he must have made a late discovery, or someone came and whispered in his ear that he would not survive the opening of the books on the Epstein affair. And so we have a double scandal. We have the entire MAGA movement marched up to the top of the hill with pitchforks and torches blazing, determined to root out the sinners and the criminals around the Epstein affair. And then Trump's attempt to march them down again when the question was, Jeffrey, who? Who is Jeffrey Epstein? Why is everybody continually talking about him? Because that attempt to march them down again has comprehensively failed. Marjorie Taylor Greene, Steve Bannon, Alex Jones, Tucker Carlson, Elon Musk, Jack Posobiec, all the top influencers of Donald Trump's movement that put him back into power are refusing to march down the hill again. Their torches are still blazing. Their pitchforks are still sharp, and they are not going to surrender their determination to bring about justice. So Donald Trump has made this catastrophic blunder. Although it's so catastrophic a blunder, one has to speculate that the price of doing what he promised he was going to do was just so high that it could not possibly be risked. And that leads us to ask the question, just exactly what did Donald Trump do on the island, in Manhattan, on the airplanes, in the hotels, in Mar-a-Lago, in Epstein's Florida palace, gin palace? Just exactly how bad was it, Donald? Trump has promised a little surprise for Russia tomorrow. I don't know, maybe it's a look at his far from big swinging dick. But it may be and indeed seems highly likely to be, a dramatic deepening of American involvement in the war against Russia, which will compound his problem with his base. You see, Trump's base is quite sanguine about the bloodshed of Palestinian children in Gaza. It's quite gung-ho, actually, to sail up the Yangtze with all guns blazing against China, but for a variety of reasons. Going to war with Russia is probably the most unpopular policy that an already deeply unpopular president could possibly champion. So if the little surprise for Russia tomorrow is, as I've just been reading, another $500 billion being pumped into a lost war in Ukraine, if it is about further materiel and weapons, if it is about the ultimate involvement of American forces in Ukraine, then we are back on the track to World War III. But Donald Trump will be going into whatever it is he's going to announce tomorrow with not as many people behind him as once upon a time he did. The threats against Iran have been partially replaced by a whole series of multiple level dirty tricks. Of course, we are familiar with the routine murder of scientists, the routine murder of off-duty government officials. We discover today that the National Security Council of Iran itself was bombed by Israel, and that the president of Iran himself was wounded in the foot in that raid. We learned today that the people at the center of the state of the Islamic Republic of Iran came within a whisker of being collectively assassinated. And we know that the assassins, the murderers, have not finished yet. And if they can, they'll murder anyone. And if they have to kill the wives, children, grandchildren, neighbors of the person they're looking for, they will have no second thoughts about doing so. That we have learned from Gaza. The slaughter of the innocents in Gaza has now reached such an obscene, pornographic scale that even hardened activists, observers, journalists and broadcasters like me can now almost no longer bear to look at it. If I see another small child being carried broken, maimed, and dead from the rubble, if I see another grieving mother weeping her imprecations at the need to murder one, two, or even all of her children, if I see another woman kissing the face of her murdered husband, if I see another man carry his little children through the streets of Gaza, I swear to you, one day my heart is going to fail entirely. And there's only one thing enrages me more than the Holocaust, than the builders of concentration camps. Well, they're not concentration camps. They're camps where they're going to concentrate millions of Palestinian refugees as a prelude to murdering or driving out into the desert of those refugees. If there's one thing that enrages me more than these war criminals and the Western politicians that continue to arm them, continue to protect and defend them in all international fora and in their own halls of government and in their own parliaments. If there's one thing that enrages me more, it is the conduct of the so-called Fourth Estate, which historically has had the role of holding to account the governments of their countries, but which has become a fully militarized, mendacious extension of their own states, and worse, a foreign state. When Sky News described a technical failure of the murder of 10 people at a watering station, a barrel of water in Gaza in July, where people desperate for a drink were queued up. They were mown down and murdered, and more than half of them were children, and most of the others were women. 10 were murdered, scores were maimed, and it was described on Sky News as a technical failure. There's nothing enrages me more than that. We've got Bryce Green, the independent writer, political activist, and contributor to Fairness, coming up right after this short break. Stay tuned.